Welcome to the Political Economy section of the ESPS core course. I am Dr. Roland Kappe. What is going on with the cows? As we will see towards the end of today's lecture videos, grazing cows on a common pasture are actually central to big debates about selfishness and altruism and property rights and institutions. And those of you who have done the readings, of course, know that I'm referring to the tragedy of the commons. And this tragedy of the commons, markets, market failures and public goods, and the prisoner's dilemma are the topics of today's lecture. What is political economy? I think for this class there are basically two sort of working definitions we can use, and one is in terms of methods and one is in terms of the substantive focus. In terms of methods, I think one of the core sort of aspects of political economy kind of type approaches to political science type questions is the idea of thinking with models. What are models? Models are abstractions, simplified versions of reality, and we usually think about who are the core actors. What are their preferences? What do they want? And what are the choices? What are the institutions? What is the game, the rules of the game in which they interact with each other? And basically setting up these kinds of game theoretic models, for example, of competition or of interactions, then allow us to make specific sort of predictions about what the outcomes should be. And models are incredibly powerful in terms of clarifying our thinking about the world, because we are able to clearly define the assumptions that we're making and deduce the predictions of the model from this. And we'll see some examples of this, of course, today in terms of, for example, the prisoner's dilemma, and next week when we talk about the spatial model of politics. The other sort of core ingredient is the idea of testing those theoretical models empirically. And for the most part, that is using sort of quantitative methods, trying to find good empirical tests for our model predictions to see whether these theoretical ideas, these theoretical mechanisms that we think describe reality are actually true. The other definition of political economy is more in terms of substantive focus, so the interaction basically between the sort of political sphere and the economic sphere. So how do political decisions affect economic reality? How much redistribution should there be? How does that affect people's choices in the economy, and the other way around as well? So how does the economic sphere affect politics? If you think about, for example, an economic crisis, what happens to the popularity of the government? So the substantive focus in terms of the interaction between sort of political sphere and economic sphere is another sort of working definition, perhaps, for us. And we'll showcase some sort of core questions and sort of nice examples of this approach to understanding the world, really, in these 2 weeks, when we talk about the prisoner's dilemma and the problem of cooperation, and the tragedy of the commons this week, and next week when we talk about spatial models of politics. The rest of today's lecture has basically multiple parts, and is in total probably a little bit longer than sort of the usual lectures. Probably it's an hour 20 or so. But I've cut it up into basically bite-sized kind of chunks, videos that you can watch sort of by themselves, ideally in sequence though, over the next few days. I'd also should flag up that there's going to be some continuity errors. I'll look slightly differently in the videos because I've recorded them at different times, and I've some are newly recorded for this year, like this part, but others sort of are remix or reuse of some of the material from last year, as I would in a real lecture, of course, in a classroom. But I've created in total, I think, a playlist that is probably more than the sum of its parts. So that is better than me just sort of either reusing everything or sort of re-recording everything afresh, because I think some of the videos work quite well, so I would like to keep it. So what does the rest look like? We have basically the next video will talk about markets. So those of you who've read the Hayek piece should find similarities here, hopefully. But of course, markets aren't the be-all, end-all of sort of the economic system. So we talk about market failures and problems. Then we talk about the prisoner's dilemma, which is sort of one of the the problem of cooperation is sort of one of the most foundational, most fundamental, I think, problems in all of the social sciences, really. And so we should understand it well. And then we have to think about sort of empirical tests, of course, and say, like, okay, so how do actual people play this? And the best way to do this is by looking at a really obscure British game show called Golden Balls, where people play something very similar to Prisoner's Dilemma. And then we'll look at monkeys and what they can teach us about sort of inequality and fairness. And at the very end of the lecture, we will revisit those cows on their beautiful pasture.